Hi everybody. Today I'm going to walk through some basics. I'm going to create this as a series of videos that would get us to a solid structure and then work on a good way to implement physics. In this one we should get as far as getting a scene showing. In the next one we'll work on implementing some controls for the camera with some pointer lock controls, and we'll move on from there. So first off, when we first start a new project, we get just index.html, a JavaScript file, and a style sheet file. The script and the style sheet are automatically linked, but we've got some work to do to clean it up and make it work the way that it should. First off, convention for this kind of a thing would have us have a source folder, which is where our JavaScript files would go, and then something like a vendor folder, and that came into the wrong spot, so I'm going to drag it out. The source and the vendor folder should both be at the top level. I'm going to move the JavaScript file, the script.js, into source, and I'm going to rename it to main.js. And then in my index.html file, I'm going to get rid of that script there, and I'm going to do this in the head and say script type equals module source equals, and then I'm in the current folder, so /src to go into the source folder, and then main.js. Okay, and then my style sheet, I'm fine with that being there. We need a container for our game to go into, so I'm going to create a div, which is just a generic box basically. Scene container, and then we do have to close it, but nothing needs to go into it. If I want a title bar, I could put an H1 or something, but I'm not going to bother. I am going to give this a demo video game. Gmo? Demo video game. All right. So that gets us the basics of what we need in the HTML file. The other thing I want to do is style up that div so it's going to take up all the space. So a hashtag gets us an item by its ID, and then within that I want to make it take up all the space. So I'm going to say position absolute, width is going to be 100%, and height is going to be 100%. So these are pretty standard web design, CSS, positioning, and sizing statements. And then that should pretty much take care of it as far as just setting up the web page itself. The rest happens within that container in JavaScript. So the next thing I have to do is get the files we need to run 3. So I'm going to add a folder for 3, so all the stuff that's directly about ThreeJS is going to go under the 3 folder, and I'm going to add a folder to that called the build, and this is the one where the main 3 module is going to go. And I happen to already have that downloaded. You can get it, of course, at the get rid of that. You can, of course, get it at the website, at the GitHub. We've looked at that a bunch of times. 3 module.js, we're going to drag it and drop it in the build folder. And that's all we need at the moment. We'll need additional files to bring in things like pointer lock controls, a GLTF loader, all those example files. They are things we'll pull into the vendor section. So the reason why we want to do the folder structure this way is because each of those examples that are pre-built are going to reference files in that way, in that relative path. So we're going to mimic the way it looks on the GitHub site. Next, we're going to go into main.js, and we're going to import some basic things out of the ThreeJS file. Now we are in the source folder. We need to go up to the top level folder, go down into the vendor 3 and build folder to get the 3 module file. So we go up 1 folder with 2 dots, and then we're going to go into the vendor folder, the 3 folder, the build folder, and then 3.module.js. Now we know we're going to want a scene. We know we're going to want a perspective camera. These should be comma separated. Perspective camera, we're going to put in an ambient light. We're going to want color, and we're going to need the WebGL renderer. We need all that really just to get started. Now you could do the import star as 3, and then you have to prefix everything with that 3 prefix, so 3 dot perspective camera, and you've brought into your working memory everything in that library. So by doing it bit by bit, you manage to reduce some of what you need. So there's a little extra work every time you choose a new thing that 3 provides and include it in your project. You have to add to this list. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is grab that container out of the web page. So we're going to use const container is document.querySelector, and we use that hashtag, which is just like what we did in the style CSS. Hashtag says, I want to look for this ID. Remember that in index.html, we said it had an ID of scene container, and an ID belongs to exactly one element, or maybe 0, on a particular page. Scene container. You can call that whatever you want. It should be meaningful to make it simple. Don't forget the semicolon at the end of the line. Okay, the first thing we need is a scene equals new scene, and we'll set its background, and I'm going to use a new color so that if I need to do other things with it, I can. Okay. We also need, I'm going to put in a comment here, create the scene. We need to create the camera. So I'm going to say const camera equals new perspective camera. And it needs some values. It needs a field of view, an aspect, and then it needs to know, so that is the ratio of the width to the height. It also needs to know when something gets, how close should it stop showing it, and when it gets too far away, should we stop showing it. So those are the clipping bounds. So the near and the far. Now I haven't defined those yet. It's not going to know what those are. I'm going to put them right above. This will make it easy to change if we decide we want to make some changes. So I'm going to set the field of view to 35. The aspect is going to be the width of the container, container.clientWidth, divided by the client height. Okay. Near, I'm going to put it 0.1, so if it gets closer than that, we're going to stop showing it. And far is going to be 100. Okay. And we can mess around with those as well. So that gives us a perspective camera. We're going to move it, so everything, if you just add it without setting its position, it's going to go to 0, 0, 0. I want it up a little bit from that and back. So 0, 1, 10 maybe. That might get us, oh, that's weird. Position.set 0, 1, and 10. So that should get us going. Let's see if we're running into any errors just by running this. I doubt we'll get much going on. Line 6, it doesn't like that because I didn't get a comma there. Remember I said they have to be comma separated. So after every one you put a comma. I've got a spare one there, but I didn't put one there. So that's the problem. Okay, so we run it again and see if we get a little further. Client height is not defined. That should be container dot client height. So it's a decent idea to stop along the way and see if you get some errors, and get some of the basic debug, catch your typing errors, things like that. Okay. Let's go ahead. We'll worry about the light a little later. We're going to worry about our renderer now. Okay. So, you know what? I hate typing renderer. We're going to call this ren for renderer. Okay, and I will probably mess that up a little later as we're going, but it's a new WebGL renderer. Its size is going to be the same as the parts of the aspect, because we're going to use that whole space of the container. Client width, container.client height. Okay, and then we're going to set a pixel ratio, and we're going to get that out of the window. Device pixel ratio. So that's a property of the window. It's an HTML property, and that lets us get to information that we don't necessarily have otherwise at this point. And then the other thing that we need, the renderer creates an object for the screen. So we want to make sure and add that to our container. Container.append ren.dom element. Okay. And then the last thing we need to do is create our render loop. And this will have no geometry on it or anything. It's just going to have this one thing. So I'm going to create the function that's going to be our render loop, and we're going to do this request animation frame render. Notice that I said the full word render because this is not ren. This is a callback to this same function that we're in, and that's how it loops over and over again. And then we say ren, this is the renderer, the scene using the camera. Okay. And then the last thing that we have not done is to call that render function. So I put that up above. You can also put it down below, and that should work. What we should be getting now, remember that we set the scene's background. So this is part of the 3 framework that we've created an object for that scene. We've set it to sky blue, so we should get a sky blue screen. And we do. That's a pretty good sign. Okay. That gets us the basics. The next thing we want to do is we're just going to make sure that we can get a little bit of geometry in and see that we're seeing stuff. So I'm going to say, not const, we're going to bring in some box buffer geometry, mesh standard material, and mesh. Okay. And now that I'm done with all of this, I can go ahead and start creating objects. We're going to do this a little differently in a future video, but today we're just going to do it very basic. So we are going to need a create game elements section here though, so that'll be okay. And that should be fine. So I'm going to say, we're just going to create a box. Const geometry equals new box buffer geometry. I'm going to make that 1 meter cube. I believe it's in meters. Material is going to be a new mesh standard material, and we send it an object that has one property, color is red. That's what those curly braces are there for. And the box is going to be a new mesh made of the geometry and the material. And then we're going to add that box to the scene. Let's see if we get it. We might get it and not realize it. That's entirely possible. Let's move this to -10, and maybe that's going to be the difference. It's not liking to run. I'm going to stop it, launch it in another window, and see if we can get anything. Let's try it back at 10. Box.position.set 0, 0, 1. And then I'm going to come and reload this. There it is. Oh, we don't have any color on it because we haven't added a light, but we do see that there is a box. and that is good enough for us. We'll add, but we can add a light real quick. Light it up. So because it's a mesh standard material instead of a mesh basic material, it needs to be lit to take the color at all. So I'm going to create a light. So I've got that already. Const light equals new ambient light, and I believe that it needs, let me check my documents here, ThreeJS ambient light. This would be a soft white light that we're going to borrow, and then we'll add it there. So we'll just do that. 0x 40 40 40. That's the hexadecimal value for a light gray kind of a thing. Scene.add that light. There we go. Now it is a red box instead of a black box. And that gets us as far as we need to go for this video. In the next one, we'll start seeing about handling pointer lock controls and having our camera be our player. That's what we'll stick with for now. Thanks, everybody.